Hey, welcome everybody. I'm going to feature a video on good God versus evil devil. That channel, which is right here. It's the religious channel of Internet Global Network. So it's much more religious than anything else we do. We kind of put everything here for the Christianity stuff. And the video that we're featuring is this one here. This is actually, what you're looking at right now is not the live video page. This is like, I saved it. You can look over here. I saved it in my files. See the URL line? I saved it in my files. So we can go to the original video, and it would be here. Saturday is, see over here on the right side, Saturday is the real Sabbath, the true day of worship. Oh, and they're playing an ad. This is the real one, or this is the original one, and so basically it's the same thing. I just saved it. Okay, so it's going to take me a while to read through all this, and let's see if we can get my live webcam going. Hold on a second. Okay. Now you get to see what I'm looking like for real. Yeah, see? Oh, we can do it even larger. We can do it like that. So you know I'm really here. This is the person who's talking to you. This is your host. Alright, let's get underway. Scorponok333, our regular viewer. Yes, Saturday is the Sabbath according to the chronology, taking place around Luke 24. Thursday was the Last Supper. Friday was his preparation day for Sabbath, as well as the day of crucifixion. Jesus died at 3 p.m. when he took his body from the cross to the tomb, and sundown was approaching. They had to leave his body to honor the Sabbath, because Sabbath is from Friday sundown until Saturday sundown. Yes, everything that was stated here is pretty much correct. And the chronology of how the events happened in the gospel had to fit within the regular schedule of the Israelite, or the Israelite Jew. These are pre-Jews though, because I wouldn't call them Jews actually until after this period, but that's a whole other issue. And he goes on to say Sunday in Luke 24 verse 1, the first day of the week, written as Mia Sabbaton, the women returned to the tomb with perfume and spices, only to find the body was not there. In addition, the Wikipedia also states Good Friday was the crucifixion of Jesus, so if they left at sundown Friday, celebrate the Sabbath and return, then Sunday cannot be the Sabbath. Sunday was the day of a pagan deity, the sun god of many names. And okay, so I just want to stop at this point and look at what all has been said. Okay, here's what I think about a whole gospel account, because I feel like it's been rather rushed through, because they stated that, you know, Jesus was arrested, because we're going all the way back to the arrest. He was found in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is on the Mount of Olives, right? And amidst all these olive trees, and by the way, I've been there at the spot that they referred to, and I've seen the olive trees. The olive trees are very old, but I don't know if the olive trees there that I saw were 2,000 plus years old. I don't know. So I don't know when those olive trees got there. And there was a bunch of churches there, and it's possible that they planted the olives later on. And this is all due to the fact that after Jesus, period, through to the next generation, like 30 years, the whole area was burned. So actually none of the olives could have been left over. None of the olive trees. I mean, you would think if they completely decimated the area, it was like a what do you call it when they go in, an army, a military is so ruthless that they go in and they flatten everything, they burn everything. So that kind of like warfare happened 30 years after Jesus was there. So obviously you look and see that area where they arrested Jesus, the olive trees, would be new olive trees, or later on they replaced the olive trees, either following tradition or something a little bit more like what do we call, not underhanded, but just to like fit the gospel story, they started to plant olive trees there. So we don't know. But I'm digressing, and I hope you don't mind. But when this is stated here that all this stuff happened, and I think it was rushed, and Sunday is the day of the pagan deity. Yeah, this comes from in Roman days they named the days after gods. But in the Hebrew calendar you also have 7 days. So from Rome to Greece to the Egyptians to the Babylonians to many of the ancient cultures have a 7-day calendar. So here's our main point. Is that the Jews and Israel were not the only people with that. They didn't create that. They didn't. They actually were inheriting it from the more ancient times. And that means from the time of Adam and Eve. This is like going all the way back to the beginning. All of humanity is under that law. Now, you say, this is a digression also, but what happens with Noah's period? Noah and his family, and then everybody getting destroyed, then going back to Noah. Well, they just continued on the 7-day week tradition, the week of 7 days, through Noah, and then passed it on. So some people followed it and some people didn't. Not to say that any of those cultures that I mentioned were pre-Noah. It doesn't make any sense, but we're not talking about a whole analysis of the historical timeline. We're just talking about Sabbath as being the part of the 7-day week. There's so much stuff here. I don't even know how I can do this without spending hours and hours and hours on it. I mean, it's just... So we're going to try to do as much as we can. Hold on just a second. I thought I would put... Does that change anything? Changes it slightly, a little bit. I put on a light. They celebrated Sabbath and then returned. Sunday cannot be. And then the pagan day. Yes, sun is the son of the sun. But it's interesting that you mention that, because also Saturday is one of their pagan deities, because it's Saturn. That's what they named the Sabbath day. And then Friday is actually based on Venus, and because that is named for one of the pagan deities, not the Romans, because it would have been called Venus Day. It's called Friday because Frey, or Frey, was a more Scandinavian Germanic. This is from the northern area of Europe who held to those deities. Okay, in Rome at that time, Mithra and Bacchus would have been common names for the deity, and this is what the Catholic Church is honoring with the Lord's Day. I guess the question would be, which Lord? Yeah, because, I mean, Lord is generic, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because actually God is generic. Lord is a word that they use to replace many other Hebrew words that are in the Bible. Lord came about as they were compiling and canonizing the Bible and the Scriptures, and they used Lord to replace a lot of other things. But it came from originally the Hebrew word Adonai. Adonai Adonenu. And Lord is generic because nobody would use the original Adonai in a generic way. They wouldn't call someone who's, like, for example, your landlord or someone who's superior to you in the army. Nobody would call him Adonai. That's just unheard of. I mean, nowadays they might, but the origin of it is not. So what they did was take it, translate it into English, or the Old English, from back then when they were doing all the creating the Bible and everything, or compiling it. They just put Lord in there, and Lord is not really sufficient. Lord is a diluting effect of translation and interpretation. Then, and the same way I would say about God, but I could do a whole other video about God, because God is actually a generic word from goat and good. They all come from the same origin, and it has nothing to do with the supreme being of the creator of human beings. It's more like God as a deity. And they didn't have a concept of a supreme being at that point in the Germanic. But let's go on. Following the symbolism of the solar deity, we can see 8-spoked wheels amongst other prominent symbols of sun worship. The symbol of fire, the sun, and the serpent were symbols of the sun god. Yeah. Keyboa, sun meditations. This is all making a lot more sense now, friend. You have challenged my thinking a great deal, but I'm just getting started as my awareness increases. Agapai. Now that is from the Greek, but is also from other areas. Agapa is the loosely translated as compassion, love, compassion. It's a more fuller meaning than saying the word love, because love also is a rather generic thing, can be used for a lot of things, like you love ice cream, or you love to be in Times Square, you love travel, or you love your puppy love boyfriend or girlfriend. So love can be applied to many things, but agape or agapa cannot. So I brought it more to that to show how I love the world in that compassionate sense. This is all very intriguing, very clever. This is a very tricky situation, and a lot of discerning is required as well. Change. I don't. Many will be able or willing, and I had my struggles as well. Okay, so this is where the viewer is saying more personal things. Let's move on. Another person writes, and another viewer, Solger for Christ. I am a fellow believer, and I wish to keep the seventh-day Sabbath of the Bible. I have walked with the Lord for 14 years now, and I do study quite frequently, but I seem to have come to somewhat of an impasse with this subject. Okay. You see, I have asked many believers to prove from the Bible alone that the reoccurring Gregorian day of Saturday is in fact the seventh-day Sabbath of Scripture. As I read and study the Bible more, I see a different calendar is recorded. Could you prove that Saturday is the seventh-day Sabbath of Scripture using Scripture alone? Okay. Yeah, so now we have the original viewer, Scorponok333, is responding to see if this can be proven by Scripture alone. And but I'm not so sure that the question written out here might be something where he's wondering whether it was started on Saturday, a original Saturday that kept continuing, or maybe it was the Friday, or maybe it was a Tuesday, or any one of the other days of all the 7 days. Why do we think that it's actually Saturday if everybody's been keeping track? If that is the depth of the question, if you understand like how I try to explain that, if it is that, then I don't have any answer for you, and Scripture can't say that, because that would require to prove all the way through time, going back week after week after week, to trace it back beyond the shadow of a doubt that someone has been counting all the days. You got to remember that calendars start and they post-date everything, like they like what they say in technology, they reverse engineer everything. Like the calendar that we have that goes all the way back to the supposed year of Jesus Christ's birth, that calendar didn't exist. They created that. Instead of creating the calendar in the year 0, they created that calendar in the year, like, I don't know, it was 500 or 1,000 or 1,400. You know, they try to say, I think it goes all the way back to like the year 1,300 or 1,400, like around that time. So in other words, this calendar that we have now, that's 2,000 years old, and then it goes back into BC, so it's like, wait a second, when did it actually start? This calendar actually didn't exist for more than 500 years. It's barely even 400 years old. So how can you have a 400-year-old calendar that they've been using for only 400 years, yet it's up to 2016 already? That means they just counted backwards. They didn't start it. So you ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Do you have to do a calendar that way? So in your heart and in your mind, the logic would have to provide an answer for that. What is the most logical and reasonable way to deal with the calendar? Don't you just start it when the calendar starts? Because that would trash the calendar that we have right now. The calendar that we have is just post-dated. It's like, I've already answered the question as to what we really should do about this predicament we're in. We should have another calendar. Keyboa, which is what we are, Keyboa people, Keyboa tribe, has a Keyboa way. And there's a book that's going to be coming out very soon. Keyboa is the key to Keyboa. So in that book we explain all this stuff, and it tells you about the calendar. So we did start a calendar, and it's properly dated. It's going by a logical way of doing things. And I think that it will stand the test of time. It will stand on its own because it is legit that way. He says, going back to the text, I would be happy to do so. And according to Luke, the order of the events, Jesus was crucified, which was the day before the Sabbath. His body was placed in the tomb the day before Sabbath by Joseph. Okay, I just want to clarify here in number 2. Point number 2. His body was placed in the tomb the day before the Sabbath. Actually, yes, he was placed in the tomb before sundown, but it was Friday. He was placed in the tomb. And then when you mention Joseph there, you're talking about Joseph of Arimathea, not Joseph his father. So we always have to specify that. I mean, people who have done enough study, they know that. But Joseph of Arimathea, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because that's a very important person to figure out what was actually going on there. You see, Joseph had a lot of money. He was actually involved with the Sanhedrin. He was one of the elders. He was one of, you could say, the oligarchy that were running things, the temple cult. Joseph of Arimathea had a lot of power. He had a lot of connections. He had a good reputation. He was almost to be compared with Nicodemus. Like, I'm not saying almost, but he and Nicodemus were very much similar. Like, you could definitely compare them in the same kind of category. Because if you remember, Nicodemus was the only one who would speak out and come to Jesus with a serious conversation. The other ones wouldn't do that. The other elders, they were against him. But Nicodemus would do it. But he would only do it under cover of night with a veil of secrecy. Joseph of Arimathea was also that way. We don't hear about Nicodemus mentioned at the crucifixion at the end of the gospel. But we do hear about Joseph of Arimathea. Nicodemus, he might have been involved, but he wasn't mentioned. We're not sure. So here's the thing about Joseph of Arimathea. And we have to factor in the spices, the aromatic herbs. Okay? These were not just herbs to embalm the body. See, they in the olden days, and also somewhere in places in the world today, they use that instead of using chemicals. I don't believe in using chemicals and hermetically sealing the body inside of these like sealable caskets, and putting in these kind of chemical concoctions. I believe in the herbs, using the herbs, but here's the thing. They were trying to resuscitate Jesus, and herbs can be used to do that. Herbs can be used to stop the bleeding. Herbs can be used for healing purposes. So there were pounds and pounds and pounds, large quantities of certain kinds of herbs were brought to the tomb. But I don't think they intended to have a tomb at all. I think that they were doing it as a place of healing. And Joseph of Arimathea owned the land. And you have to ask it this way, because with Joseph of Arimathea being involved, how come you don't hear about him later on? How come you don't hear the disciples or Mary of Magdalene questioning Joseph of Arimathea? Like, what did you do? How come you don't hear about him later on? I don't think he's even mentioned in the Acts, which is after the Gospel. I don't think he is mentioned. So they keep it kind of secretive. They only talk about him as being involved with the tomb and providing that place and providing the healing herbs. So there's a lot of questions unanswered. Just like I said, well, why was Nicodemus not mentioned? People are mentioned and they're not mentioned again usually. Like they have one place where they're inserted into the story and then it doesn't follow any continuum. A lot of people are like that in there. Like Mary and Martha and Lazarus and various others. Look at each one of them. Each one of these figures. John the Baptist you hear about several times, but you don't have, you have to fill in the blanks basically. There's so much in this conversation, and I've just scratched the surface of where we began with all of this. I'm going to have to do another video, and I'll try to make it concise. I'll have like a beginning point and then like flow with this major points that I want to bring out and then conclude it. Because this will just be like your intro, your teaser.